August 17th, 1973. Highway 61, just outside Germantown, Tennessee. It was late at night, the quiet so thick it felt as if it swallowed even the sound of breathing. On the gravel shoulder lay two bicycles, tipped on their sides. The handlebars were twisted sharply, as if rough hands had yanked them hard and then let go. One wheel was still spinning, slowly, but enough to make it clear that whatever had happened had occurred only moments before. Very close, very recent, and very frightening. There were no riders, no voices calling out to each other, no figures running toward help. Only the dark road, flanked by empty fields and a line of silent trees, as though the night itself were trying to hide something it did not want anyone to know. The two boys who rode those bicycles vanished. Michael and Daniel Carvalho, 16-year-old twins. Good students, polite, altar servers every Sunday at church. The kind of sons parents trusted, neighbors loved, teachers admired. That night, they left the summer fair smiling, talking about tomorrow, promising to be home on time so their mother wouldn't worry. And then, neither of them ever walked through the front door again. Try to put yourself in the mother's place. One night passes. Then the next morning, she opens the bedroom door and sees two beds still perfectly made. An icy silence. Not a single sign to cling to. Only one question tightening around her chest, threatening to crush her breath. Where are my children? For 46 years, that family lived with that question, suspended between hope and despair. Until the summer of 2019, when an excavator dug into the ground 12 miles from town and struck something that had been buried for far too long. What was pulled up was not just evidence. It was a blow straight into the memory of the entire town. If you're looking for a missing person story that once seemed hopeless, yet in the end the truth found its own way back, then you're in the right place. But let me warn you, this story is heavy. Heavy enough that you may need to pause for a moment just to breathe. This is the story of two bicycles abandoned in the night, of a mother who never stopped waiting, and of a truth that tried to stay buried, but ultimately refused to remain silent. Before we talk about that fateful night, there is something very important you need to know. You need to know who Michael and Daniel Carvalho were, because they were not just two cold names in a missing persons file. They were real people with lives, personalities, and dreams that were ordinary in the most human way. Michael and Daniel were identical twins, so alike that at a quick glance, almost no one could tell them apart. But to those who loved them, the differences were unmistakable. Michael was the older one, more energetic, quick to smile, quick to talk. Above his left eyebrow was a small scar, a souvenir from a bicycle fall when he was 9 years old. A scar their mother had once scolded him over through worry, then turned away quietly to wipe her tears. Daniel was quieter, more reserved. He spoke less, thought more. He was often seen carrying a book, reading wherever he could, even while laughter and noise filled the space around him. The boys attended Germantown High School and were honor students. They stayed out of trouble. No reckless crowds, no mischief. The kind of students teachers remembered for their manners, not for disciplinary reports. Every Sunday, they served as altar boys at St. Benedict Catholic Church. Two children standing side by side in white robes, identical faces, yet different eyes. One bright and open, the other deep and contemplative. Their parents, Antonio and Maria Carvalho, were immigrants from Portugal. In 1955, they left their homeland carrying very little luggage, but an enormous amount of faith. Faith that if they worked hard, if they lived honestly, their children would have a better future. Antonio worked at a textile mill, long shifts that drained his strength. Maria cleaned houses for others, her hands perpetually rough from cleaning chemicals. Life was not abundant, but their small home was filled with laughter, because they had Michael and Daniel, two good sons, smart, kind, and the greatest pride of their family. The Carvalho family was not rich in money, but rich in a way that mattered deeply. Rich in love, rich in hope, rich in the belief that good things would eventually come. And that is why, when the two boys disappeared, the pain was not just loss. It was the collapse of an entire dream, one their parents had built with sweat, sacrifice, and faith over nearly 20 years. August 17th, 1973. Germantown was settling into one of the liveliest evenings of the summer. The town's summer fair, an event anyone who grew up in a small place like this remembered clearly, because in a year marked by routine and worry, there were only a handful of nights when everyone came out together to laugh, to relax, to forget daily life for a while. The lights of the Ferris wheel flickered on while the sky was still dim. Yellow bulbs cut through the warm, humid Tennessee night. The smell of popcorn, fried dough, and sweets drifted through the air, mixing with live music playing from a temporary stage. Adults gathered in small circles to talk. Children ran around, shrieking with excitement. And 16-year-olds lived fully in that fragile space between childhood and adulthood. Michael and Daniel had been waiting for this night all week. To them, it wasn't just a fair. It was freedom. A night to be out with friends. A night that made them feel just a little like they were growing up. Maria didn't want to let them go at first. For an immigrant mother, no matter how peaceful the town seemed, nighttime always carried a quiet, instinctive fear. But Antonio convinced her. They're 16. They're good kids. Let them enjoy themselves for once. In the end, Maria agreed, but not without rules. Be home by 10 o'clock. No exceptions. And the two of them had to stay together the entire time. No splitting up. No wandering off alone. Michael and Daniel nodded immediately. They were used to rules. And they were the kind of sons who kept their word. Around 7:30 that evening, they pedaled away from home. Two dark blue, 10-speed Schwinn bicycles. Christmas gifts their parents had saved a long time to afford. The sound of tires rolling over pavement, their voices light with excitement. They reached the fair, met friends, bought tickets, played a few games, stood talking beneath the bright lights. Later, someone would remember seeing the brothers around 9:45 near a basketball toss booth. Daniel had won a stuffed bear. He hugged it to his chest, smiling shyly, saying he planned to give it to a girl he liked. Michael stood beside him, teasing, laughing louder, more at ease in moments like that. Everything was ordinary. So ordinary that no one could imagine it was the last time anyone would ever see them. Just before 10, Michael glanced at his watch. We should go, he said. Mom will worry if we're late. The brothers said goodbye to their friends and wheeled their bikes out of the fairgrounds, leaving behind the music, the lights, and the safety of the crowd. They didn't know that the moment they rode beyond the edge of that light, they were entering a stretch of road where fate had already begun to change course. 10 o'clock. Such a small promise. But it was the last promise Michael and Daniel ever made to their mother, and they never had the chance to keep it. The ride home from the fair should have taken no more than 15 minutes, a route so familiar to Michael and Daniel that they could have pedaled it without thinking. Poplar Avenue, then a turn on a Highway 61. They had ridden that road hundreds of times, by day and by night. But that night, Highway 61 felt different. The farther they moved from the fairground lights, the darker the world became. Streetlights grew sparse, pools of light and shadow stretching out like long, uneven breaths. On one side lay open fields, the wind whispering through tall grass. On the other, a line of trees and low woodland, dense, black, and silent. The sound of bicycle tires against asphalt grew sharper. Insects chirred steadily in the humid Tennessee summer air. Michael and Daniel rode side by side. Maybe they were talking about nothing in particular. The stuffed bear, the next day, the small, ordinary things people talk about when they believe they have many tomorrows ahead of them. There was no hurry, no fear. Home was only a short distance away. And then, on that very familiar stretch of road, something made them stop. No one knows how that moment unfolded. Maybe headlights suddenly flooded the road from behind. Maybe a car slowed along the shoulder. Maybe a voice called out from the darkness, close enough to make the boys turn their heads. Or perhaps it was something sudden, too fast for any reaction at all. All that is known is this. At some point on Highway 61, Michael and Daniel stopped riding. Their bicycles were left behind on the gravel shoulder. Handlebars twisted, marks in the dirt, drag marks, scuffs, still visible. One wheel kept spinning, as if the rider had let go only seconds earlier. That detail would later haunt everyone who heard the story, because it said one thing very clearly. Whatever happened, it happened fast. So fast that the boys had no time to do anything except disappear. No screams were heard. No nearby houses were close enough to see anything. The road that night had only darkness and silence as witnesses. In the span of those brief 15 minutes, the distance between the fair and home turned into a void that would stretch on for 46 years. From that moment on, Michael and Daniel Carvalho were never seen again. All that remained were two bicycles lying still along Highway 61, quiet, brutal punctuation marks, closing the sentence of what had once seemed like an ordinary summer night. The morning of August 18th, 1973. Maria Carvalho woke up like she did every other morning. It was still early. Sunlight hadn't yet filled the windows. She slipped on her familiar house slippers and stepped into the hallway, intending to wake her sons for Saturday morning Massachusetts. A routine she had followed for years. Steady, comforting, unquestioned. Maria opened the bedroom door, and her heart dropped straight to the floor. Both beds were still perfectly made. The blankets and pillows held the same neat folds from the day before. There was no sign that anyone had slept there during the night. The room was so quiet it felt cold, as if the warmth of two children had never existed there at all. Maria called their names. Her voice trembled, breaking against the narrow walls of the room. There was no answer. She turned and called for Antonio. This time, fear was unmistakable in every syllable. Antonio rushed in, still half asleep. But one look at the empty beds was enough. Something was very wrong. He tried to calm his wife, suggesting maybe the boys had come home late and fallen asleep somewhere else in the house. But even as he spoke, he didn't believe his own words. They searched the entire house. The living room, the kitchen, the basement, the backyard. No Michael, no Daniel. Not a single sign that the boys had returned home during the night. Antonio grabbed his car keys. He didn't say much. Just, I'm going to look for them. Then he drove off, following the exact route his sons had taken the night before. Poplar Avenue. Then onto Highway 61. He drove slowly, scanning every stretch of road, his heart pounding so loudly he felt it in his chest. And then he saw them. Two bicycles lying on their sides along the gravel shoulder of Highway 61. The handlebars twisted as if wrenched violently. Antonio slammed on the brakes, leapt from the car, and ran toward them, calling his sons' names into the empty space. Michael, Daniel. His voice echoed and disappeared into the wind. There was no reply. Then he noticed the detail that sent a chill through his entire body. One was still spinning, slowly, silently, as if it hadn't yet come to rest after the rider let go. In that moment, Antonio understood something with terrifying clarity. This hadn't happened long ago. It had happened recently, very recently, but he had arrived too late. All around him were open fields and silent trees. No houses, no witnesses, only two abandoned bicycles, left behind as mute testimony to a tragedy no one had seen in time. Antonio stood there for a long while. Then he returned to his car and drove to the nearest gas station, where he called the police from a payphone. His hand shook so badly he had to dial the number more than once. Back at home, Maria sat motionless in her son's bedroom, staring at the empty beds, feeling as though the breath had been pulled out of the world. That morning, Germantown woke up like it always did. But for the Carvalho family, that morning marked the permanent end of a peaceful life. And within just a few short hours, a mother's quiet worry had turned into a nightmare with no way out. Less than an hour after Antonio made the call, Shelby County patrol cars appeared along Highway 61. Two officers stepped out, looked at the bicycles lying on the shoulder, took notes, snapped photos, and asked the standard questions. They followed procedure, but their calm, almost detached manner sent a chill through the air. They told Antonio that boys that age sometimes run away. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they just wanted to taste a bit of freedom. They advised him to wait a day or two. At that, Antonio's face flushed red. He shook his head again and again. My sons aren't like that. They wouldn't run away. Something happened, right here. But that morning, the police had not yet grasped the gravity of the situation. To them, it might have been two teenagers coming home late. To the Carvalho family, it was already the worst fear imaginable. While Antonio remained at the scene, Maria began making phone calls at home. She called the boys' friends, neighbors, people from their parish. Over and over, she asked the same question. Has anyone seen Michael and Daniel? Each answer was the same. No, no one had seen them after the fair. By noon, the news had spread throughout Germantown. In a small town, secrets don't last long. Within hours, everyone knew that the Carvalho twins were missing. And when a child goes missing in a small town, the response is usually swift. Neighbors came to the Carvalho home. Some brought water. Some brought food. Some simply came to stand with the family. Volunteer search groups formed. People fanned out through the wooded areas along Highway 61, walked the drainage ditches, and called the boys' names under the oppressive summer heat. Some searched with faith they would be found. Others with a fear they dared not put into words. St. Benedict Church printed simple flyers. Two identical faces stared out from black and white photographs. Beneath them, a few lines of information and a contact number. The flyers went up on utility poles, storefronts, bulletin boards, and gas station windows. Each one was a silent plea. By afternoon, local television stations began reporting the story. On screens across Shelby County appeared the headline, twin brothers missing after summer fair. Maria sat in the living room, watching her sons' faces on television, feeling as though she were looking into another world, one where they still existed, but were impossibly out of reach. As evening fell and the sun went down, concern in the town slowly turned into fear. People began to understand that if the boys still hadn't come home, this was no longer a case of teenagers staying out late. Germantown entered the first night of a missing persons case. And no one yet knew that this was only the first night of a long, very long stretch of days the Carvalho family would be forced to live with waiting, with hope, and with a fear that had no name. In the days that followed, the search expanded. But what police and townspeople found were only scattered fragments, blurred, incomplete, never enough to form the full picture. A few people said they remembered seeing a dark-colored van parked near Highway 61 around the time the boys left the fair. No one could recall the make. No one remembered a license plate. Just a vague sense that something didn't belong on that quiet road. A vehicle that appeared and vanished, like a shadow passing through memory. Someone else recalled a man at the edge of the fair that night, perhaps in his 40s, wearing a denim jacket. He stood there for a long time, didn't play any games, didn't talk to anyone, just watched. But when questioned further, no one could describe his face. Every detail slipped away, as if the man had never truly existed. Police documented everything. They drew maps, marked zones, followed every smallest statement they were given. But the deeper they went, the more everything felt like fog, present, but impossible to grasp. Search dogs were brought to the scene on Highway 61. They sniffed around the abandoned bicycles, then picked up a scent leading into the woods. Volunteers followed silently, holding their breath, hoping each step would bring them closer to the boys. But after only a few hundred feet, the dog stopped. It circled, sniffed the ground again, and then the trail vanished, as if Michael and Daniel's scent had been cut off abruptly. That detail sent a chill through everyone who heard it, because it suggested a terrifying possibility that the boys had not left that place on their own feet. The search widened further. People began to consider the worst. The Mississippi River. Dive teams were brought in, descending into dark, cold, murky water. They pulled up what the river had swallowed over the years. Old tires, rusted shopping carts, unidentifiable pieces of metal. But not Michael, not Daniel. Day after day, small leads surfaced only to disappear. Each spark of hope flared briefly, then died. With every failed search, the weight hanging over Germantown grew heavier. People began speaking in hushed tones about thoughts no one had dared voice before. Maybe the boys were no longer here. And for the Carvalho family, every fading lead was more than just a dead end in an investigation. It was another cut into the belief that their sons were still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Time passed, and that, more than anything, is what makes a missing persons case so cruel. In the early days, there were still footsteps in the woods, flashlights cutting through the trees, hope clinging to every small statement, every fragile lead. But day by day, the urgency began to fade. The town slowly returned to its old rhythm. The Carvalho family could not. The investigation continued. On paper, files were updated, leads were logged, but nothing new emerged. No new witnesses, no clear trail leading to Michael and Daniel. The case began to be described with a cold, clinical phrase, an unsolved disappearance. And when the truth refuses to appear, people begin to invent their own answers. Whispers spread through the town. Some said maybe the boys had run away. Others suggested they were tired of being controlled. The words didn't have to be cruel to cut deeply. Each time they were spoken, they placed another invisible weight on the shoulders of the boys' parents. As if their grief wasn't already heavy enough, they now had to carry the suspicion of others as well. Antonio heard the rumors. He didn't argue. He only shook his head. He knew who his sons were. Maria grew quieter. She didn't explain. She didn't defend herself. She simply lived on, day after day, with a nameless emptiness inside her. There was no body to bury, no funeral, no place to light a candle. The Carvalho family was trapped in a state only those who have lived it truly understand. No closure, no ending, no goodbye. You cannot cry all the way through it. You cannot say it is over. All you can do is wait. Wait for a phone call. Wait for a piece of news. Wait for a miracle. And every morning when you wake up, you ask the same question. Is there any news today? In the years that followed, new detectives took over the case. Each one reviewed the files, re-interviewed old witnesses, retraced familiar roads. And every time, it ended the same way, in silence. No new evidence. No breakthrough. Gradually, the case was pushed into the cold storage of old files. The media stopped mentioning it. The flyers faded, peeling off telephone poles. People who once searched returned to their own lives. But for the Carvalho family, time did not heal anything. It only stretched the pain thinner and longer. Each passing year was not a step toward peace. It was another year lived alongside a question that would never be answered. And that waiting, endless, unresolved, is the heaviest sentence a family can be forced to carry. 46 years passed, not like a flowing river, but like individual drops of time falling slowly onto one family's life. For Germantown, the years brought new houses, widened roads, generations that grew up and moved on. But for the Carvalho family, time stopped in the summer of 1973. Antonio was the first to collapse under the weight. He left his job at the textile mill not long after his sons disappeared. The long shifts had always been exhausting, but now they were unbearable. His mind was never at work. It was out on the roads, in the woods, in the places he hadn't yet searched. Day after day, he drove across Shelby County, as if one more drive, just one more turn, might reveal his boys standing by the roadside, calling their father home. People saw Antonio at gas stations, empty lots, quiet country roads. He asked very little. He simply looked long and hard. His eyes carried a depth of exhaustion that needed no explanation. He lived to search, and when he didn't find them, he kept living only because he couldn't allow himself to stop. Maria was different. She didn't search outside. She kept everything inside the house, as if preserving it might keep time from taking her sons away. Michael and Daniel's bedroom remained exactly as it had been. The beds were always neatly made. School books still sat on the desk. Small belongings, a shirt, a pair of shoes, remained where they had always been. Every week, Maria dusted the room. She changed the bed linens regularly. Not because she truly believed her sons would return the next day, but because if she stopped, she feared she would be admitting that they might never come home at all. Every Sunday, Maria sat in the front pew at St. Benedict Church. She wore black. She prayed the rosary until the beads wore smooth in her hands. People grew so used to the sight that if she were ever absent, they would worry. Her prayers were not for grand miracles. She asked for just one small thing: let my sons be alive. Or, if not, please let me know where they are. The seasons passed quietly inside that house. Summers came and went, bringing heat that stirred memories of the fair night. Autumn leaves fell. Winters grew colder. And every spring arrived with the same unanswered question. If my boys were still alive, how old would they be now? The 1980s passed. Then the 1990s. Then the 2000s. The world changed. People spoke of technology, of the future. But for Maria, the future had only one shape: the shape of two sons forever frozen at 16. Antonio died in 1998. The doctors said it was heart disease, but those who knew the family understood that his heart had been tired for a very long time. At the cemetery, Maria stood alone at her husband's grave for a long while. And from that day on, she came every week, whispering the same words: I'm still searching. I haven't given up. Hope did not vanish all at once. It wore away slowly. Each year it grew a little smaller, a little thinner, but it remained. Not strong enough to inspire certainty, yet strong enough to prevent surrender. For 46 years, Maria lived with hope as thin as a thread. But that thread held her upright. It kept the bedroom intact. It kept two names from being forgotten. And it kept the truth, no matter how deeply buried, anchored to one person who was still waiting for the day it would finally be called back into the light. Summer 2019. About 12 miles from Germantown, on a vacant stretch of land near Kierville, crews began clearing ground for a new housing development. The land had sat untouched for years, overgrown with weeds, choked by trees, as if the earth itself had been quietly guarding a past no one remembered anymore. That morning began like any other construction job. The sound of machinery filled the air. An excavator dug through layer after layer of soil, dust rising in the sun, until the bucket struck something unexpectedly hard. Not rock, not tree roots, concrete. The operator stopped. He assumed it might be an old foundation, maybe a forgotten tank buried decades earlier. But as they dug deeper, what emerged didn't resemble any ordinary structure. Roughly stacked bricks formed a rectangular shape. Above them lay rotting wood and rusted metal, like a makeshift roof hastily built and then abandoned. A cellar. The air around the site seemed to sink. The supervisor leaned in to look into the opening. It took only seconds for his expression to change completely. He spoke just a few words. Call the police. Now, when Shelby County deputies arrived, the area was immediately sealed off. Yellow tape went up. Workers stepped back, standing in silence, no one speaking. There are moments when people sense they're standing before something far beyond ordinary curiosity. Flashlights cut down into the cellar. And then, the truth revealed itself. Beneath layers of collapsed soil and debris were human remains. Not one, but two skeletons, lying close together, silent, as if they had been there for a very long time. A very, very long time. Around them were fragments of decayed clothing, pieces of denim, worn athletic shoes, reduced now to faint outlines. Time had taken almost everything, but it could not erase the evidence that human lives had once existed there. No one said out loud, but everyone understood. This was not a routine discovery. This was a story that had been buried. When the forensic team arrived, every detail was carefully documented. Soil samples collected, objects marked, and then, amid the mud and earth, something small appeared, something that made everything stop. A class ring. It was old, tarnished, coated in dirt. But when it was cleaned, the engraving was still legible. A name, a graduating year, an identity. In that moment, 46 years seemed to collapse into a single breath. What had once been speculation, vague fear, unanswered questions, now had form. The two boys who vanished in 1973 were no longer an abstraction. They were here, right beneath this ground. The news spread quickly. A shocking discovery. Two sets of human remains found in a hidden cellar, possibly connected to a decades-old missing persons case. The entire area fell into a heavy silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that follows when a long-buried secret is finally pulled into the light. And in Germantown, 12 miles away, an elderly mother did not yet know that on that morning, after 46 years of waiting, her sons had finally been found. Amid the damp soil and the fragments of time inside that cellar, there was one small object that made everyone present stop, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it carried with it. A class ring. It was tarnished, scratched, caked with decades of mud. But when an investigator gently wiped away the dirt, the engraved letters slowly emerged, clear in a way that hurt to look at. A name, a graduation year, an identity that could not be mistaken. In that moment, no one spoke, because everyone understood the ring was not just a personal belonging. It was the answer to 46 years of waiting. Proof that the two boys who vanished in 1973 had not disappeared into nothingness. They had been here all along, lying silently beneath the earth. The investigation was reactivated immediately. Forensic procedures began. But deep down, those holding the ring already knew. The science would only confirm what the heart had already understood. That afternoon, a police car pulled up in front of an aging house in Germantown, a house where time itself seemed to have stopped for nearly half a century. An investigator stepped onto the porch and knocked softly. Not the sharp knock that delivers bad news, but a slow, heavy one, as if he too was preparing himself. Maria Carvalho opened the door. She was 86 years old, her back bent, her hair white, her hands trembling as they gripped the wooden door frame. When she saw the expression on the man's face, she froze. No long explanation was needed. No careful phrasing. One look was enough. She whispered, very softly, almost to herself, "You found my boys, didn't you?" The investigator nodded. His voice gentled. "We believe so, ma'am. We found a ring. Michael's ring." Maria stood still. She didn't scream. She didn't cry right away. She reached for the doorframe, steadying herself, as if to keep from falling. Some pain lasts so long that when it is finally named, it doesn't strike all at once. It spreads, slowly and deeply, like water, soaking into parched ground after years of drought. She sat down in her familiar chair in the living room. Her lips moved slightly. Her eyes drifted far away, as if retracing every year she had lived. 46 years. 46 years of waiting for an answer. And when the answer finally arrived, it was both devastating and suffocatingly relieving. After a long while, Maria spoke again. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "I knew it. I always knew someone took them. They would never leave me." Only then did the tears fall. Not sobs, just quiet tears, tracing lines down a face shaped by decades of endurance. This was not only the grief of losing children. It was the moment a mother was finally proven right, that she had not been delusional, not mistaken, not hoping in vain. After 46 years, Maria Carvalho finally knew where her sons had been. And even though the truth arrived with cruel lateness, it was still the truth she had waited nearly a lifetime to hear. The days that followed passed in a suffocating state of waiting. Bone samples were sent to the medical examiner's office. DNA was extracted and compared with Maria's. Everything moved slowly, precisely, coldly, according to scientific procedure. But for the Carvalho family, every passing hour felt like a stone pressing down on their chest. Then the results came back. DNA confirmation. The two sets of remains found in the cellar were Michael and Daniel Carvalho. 46 years after the night they vanished, the boys' identities were finally spoken again. Not on missing person flyers, not in whispered prayers, but in forensic reports. The cause of death findings left everyone who read them in silence. Both boys had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head, blows strong enough to fracture their skulls, fast enough to take their lives in a short time. There was no indication they survived long after being taken. No chance to wait for rescue. Everything had ended that very night. The truth landed like a second knife, sharp and cold. And yet, it also extinguished Maria's deepest torment. At least her sons had not suffered for days. At least they had not waited in fear and hopelessness. Then came the detail that stunned the entire town of Germantown. The place where the boys were found was only 12 miles from their home. Close enough to be unbelievable. Close enough to hurt. For 46 years, the town had searched the woods, the river, the familiar roads. And all that time, Michael and Daniel had been lying not far from home, beneath a piece of land no one had ever thought to look at. The news spread quickly. People who had joined the searches decades earlier stood silently in front of their television screens. Those who had posted flyers, who had called the boys' names into the forest, now understood why they had never found them. Not because they hadn't tried, but because the truth had been hidden too well. Germantown fell into an unusual silence. Not the silence of forgetting, but the silence of facing something long avoided. Facing old memories. Facing the question of why. Facing the helpless realization that some tragedies happen very close to home and still go unseen. For Maria, the pain did not disappear, but it changed shape. The pain of not knowing became the pain of knowing too late. And between those two kinds of suffering, one thing remained unchanged. The love of a mother for her two sons, finally named by the truth. Once Michael and Daniel's identities were confirmed, the investigation immediately shifted to a different question. Who had buried the boys there? And the answer had been sitting quietly in land records, waiting to be opened for nearly half a century. The land where the cellar was discovered had once belonged to a man named Raymond Dalton. He purchased the property in the late 1960s, several years before Michael and Daniel disappeared. In 1973, Dalton was about 42 years old. He worked as a mechanic at a small garage in Kierville. He lived alone. No wife, no children, no major scandals. No one recalled him starting fights or doing anything overtly strange. When people who had known Dalton were later interviewed, they used the same words again and again. Quiet, cold, private. A man so ordinary he was easy to overlook. The type who went to work, came home, didn't socialize, didn't draw attention, didn't invite curiosity into his personal life. And it was precisely that ordinariness that made people uneasy. Dalton had never appeared in the 1973 investigation. He was not a suspect. He was never interviewed. He never appeared on any watch list. He existed entirely outside suspicion, living on the very land that concealed the boys, unseen and unquestioned. When investigators began retracing Dalton's past, small details slowly fell into place. The cellar had been built solidly, with deliberately stacked bricks and a makeshift roof. It did not resemble a hole dug in panic. It looked like something prepared in advance, or at least concealed with care. The search expanded to other places Dalton had used. A storage unit he had rented years earlier. Inside were old belongings coated in dust, tools, rotting tarps. And then, on one of those tarps, forensic specialists found traces of dried blood, long since aged. DNA testing confirmed the blood matched Michael and Daniel. The evidence required no lengthy explanation. It spoke for itself. Raymond Dalton had died in 2011. A quiet death. No investigation. No suspicion. He lived nearly 40 years after the night in 1973, 40 years of ordinary routines, going to work and coming home, while beneath his land lay a horrifying secret. There would be no confession, no trial, only cold evidence arriving far too late, yet clear enough to outline the profile of the most dangerous kind of person. Not because he stood out, but because he blended in. And that was the truth Germantown was forced to confront. That evil does not always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it lives very close, very quietly, and for a very long time, without anyone ever noticing. No one can know the exact minutes, the precise seconds of the night of August 17th, 1973. The only person who knew the full truth carried it with him to the grave. But based on the scene, the physical evidence, the terrain, and what remained, investigators were able to reconstruct the most plausible sequence of events, one clear enough to make the skin crawl. Around 10 o'clock that night, Michael and Daniel left the fair and began riding along Highway 61. The road was dark and quiet, with only scattered streetlights. Forest on one side, open fields on the other. If someone stopped them there, no one would see it. No one would hear it. Raymond Dalton could have approached them in several ways. He might have slowed his vehicle behind them, headlights flooding their backs. He might have pulled over, pretending to have car trouble, asking for help. For two teenage boys raised to be polite and respectful, stopping to listen to an adult would not have seemed unusual. And sometimes, all it takes is a single moment of trust for everything to collapse. There is also the possibility that it was more forceful. A sudden cutoff, a threat, a situation that left no time to react. However it happened, the result was the same. Two bicycles abandoned on the roadside. One was still spinning, and two boys removed from the path that led home. Dalton led Michael and Daniel onto a dirt road that turned toward his property. A hidden turnoff, no lights, no nearby houses. Far enough that any cry for help, if there was one, would go unheard. Isolated enough for everything to happen in complete darkness. On that land stood a cellar. Not a hastily dug hole, but a structure that showed intention, brickwork, cover, concealment. That detail led investigators to believe Dalton had prepared for this. Perhaps not specifically for that night, but certainly for a secret he intended to hide for a long time. What happened next was confirmed through forensic evidence. Both boys died from severe blunt force trauma to the head. Multiple blows. Significant force. Decisive. There were no signs they were held alive for long. No indication they survived beyond that night. Everything ended quickly, brutally, without any chance of rescue. No one knows what Michael and Daniel thought in their final moments. Whether they called out to each other, whether they thought of their mother, whether they understood that everything was being taken from them. Those questions will never be answered, and that silence is what hurts the most. Afterward, Dalton dragged their bodies into the cellar, buried them, covered everything up, then returned to his ordinary life. The next morning, he may have gone to work as usual, while all of Germantown began a desperate search. What is most frightening is not only the violence itself. It is that it happened so close, so fast, and was hidden by a man who appeared completely ordinary. A man no one suspected. A man who lived for decades carrying the secret of that night, while two boys remained frozen forever at 16. That is how the tragedy happened. No noise, no witnesses, only darkness, an empty road, and the cruelty of a moment no one was able to stop. The question that haunts so many people after the truth came to light is this. How could one person commit such a crime and remain beyond suspicion for 46 years? The answer does not lie in a single factor. It lies in the era, the circumstances, and in how evil knows how to hide. In 1973, investigative technology was extremely limited. There was no DNA to compare, no digital databases, no surveillance cameras lining roads. Everything depended on eyewitnesses, physical traces, and human memory. And memory fades quickly, especially under fear and chaos. The bicycles were found on Highway 61, so the entire early search effort focused there. The roadside woods, drainage ditches, roads near the boys' home. Police and volunteers searched thoroughly, tirelessly, but they searched where logic at the time pointed them. No one imagined the boys had been taken farther away. No one considered that the truth might lie outside the familiar search radius. Meanwhile, Raymond Dalton lived 12 miles from Germantown. Not far, but far enough to fall outside the initial focus. His land was isolated, with no nearby neighbors and little traffic. A place well suited to hide something no one expected to exist, Dalton also had no serious criminal record. He caused no trouble. He didn't stand out. He was the kind of man society easily overlooks. He went to work regularly, came home on time, took no part in community life. No one thought about him when there was no reason to. That invisibility became his most dangerous protection. As the years passed, the case grew cold. Detectives were replaced. Witnesses aged. Some died. Small details that once existed faded with time. And without new evidence, without new reason for suspicion, the name Raymond Dalton was never spoken. There was another factor, one that is especially painful to acknowledge. Trust. Germantown was a small town. People believed evil came from outside, from strangers, from passing shadows. No one wanted to believe that danger could live nearby, quietly sharing the same landscape year after year. Dalton did not need to be exceptionally clever. He only needed to be patient, silent, and to live in a time when technology had not yet caught up with crime. And so, while one family spent nearly half a century in pain and waiting, the man responsible walked through the years as if he were ordinary. This was not only the failure of an investigation, it was the tragedy of an era, one in which the truth could be buried simply because it was quiet and too easy to overlook. In late June of 2019, Germantown gathered once more at St. Benedict Church, not to celebrate a feast day, but to remember. After 46 years, the small town could finally speak the names of the two boys it had searched for nearly half a century. The vigil took place on a calm summer evening. No rain. A light breeze moved through the church grounds. Hundreds of people stood close together, candles in their hands. Some had known Michael and Daniel personally. Others had only heard the story passed down from their parents. But everyone came for the same reason. The town's children had come home. Candles were passed from hand to hand, small flames trembling in the dark. No one spoke loudly. Words felt unnecessary. There was only silence, thick and deep, like a belated apology offered to two boys who had waited far too long. Maria Carvalho sat in the front pew. She looked small among the crowd, her hair nearly white. Her trembling hands held her candle tightly, as if afraid the flame might go out. When the priest spoke the names Michael and Daniel, the church fell completely still. Those names were no longer a call to search, but a farewell. At the end of the vigil, Maria rose. She walked slowly toward the altar, one step at a time, as though crossing the length of her entire life. She lit two candles, one for Michael, one for Daniel. When the flames steadied, she bowed her head for a long moment. No one heard her words, but everyone understood. They were words she had carried inside her for 46 years. A few weeks later, the formal funeral was held. Again at St. Benedict Church, the place where the boys had once worn white robes, standing side by side, serving Mass every Sunday. Two simple caskets rested next to each other. No display, no ornamentation, only dignity and a sorrow fully ripened by time. Maria stood between the two caskets. One hand rested on each. She did not cry out. Some tears had been shed long ago. Her face was calm, like someone who had finally reached the end of a very long journey. At the cemetery, as the caskets were lowered into the ground, Maria leaned down and whispered something. Later, someone asked what she had said. She smiled faintly. "I told my boys that I never gave up. And now, you're finally home." In that moment, it was no longer the tragedy of a criminal case. It was the closing of a wound that had lasted nearly a lifetime. And as the candle flames faded in the wind, Germantown understood this. Some goodbyes come very late, but they still need to be spoken so that those left behind can finally go on living. The story of Michael and Daniel Carvalho does not end with a courtroom. There were no handcuffs, no verdict read aloud before the public. The man responsible had died many years earlier, taking legal punishment with him out of this world. Justice, in the way people usually expect it, did not arrive in time. But something did return. The truth. After 46 years of being buried, forgotten, obscured by time and silence, the truth still found its way back into the light. It came late. It came painfully, but it was enough to name the two boys. Enough to give a mother what she had waited nearly her entire life for. An answer. Michael and Daniel did not run away. They did not abandon their family. They were taken. And for 46 years, their mother had been right. The truth does not bring complete peace. It does not rewind time. It does not erase decades spent waiting. But the truth allows those who remain to say goodbye, to lay their pain down, to finally take a full breath after nearly half a century of holding it in. This story is not only about a crime. It is about love, about a mother who refused to forget her children, about a small immigrant family who lived quietly and honestly, yet endured an unspeakable loss, and about a truth that reminds us, evil may hide for a very long time, but it rarely disappears forever. If you're watching this and have ever waited for someone who never came home, if you have lived with a question that had no answer, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are kinds of pain only those inside them can truly understand. And there are truths that take a very long time to surface, but are still worth waiting for. If Michael and Daniel's story left something with you, consider leaving a comment. What stayed with you the most? Or where are you watching from? What city? What country? Every comment is one small way to ensure that stories like this are not forgotten. And if you want to continue walking alongside real stories, cases that have not yet been told fully, deeply, or humanly, consider subscribing to the channel. Because as long as there are people willing to listen, the truth still has somewhere to return to. Sometimes justice arrives late, but memory should not be lost. And the people who were taken deserve to be remembered, not through fear, but through truth.